Your prayers aren't unanswered. They're being cancelled by a quieter voice inside you that keeps whispering, "I'm not worthy yet." You kneel in faith, but you rise in guilt, and the silence you hear feels suspiciously like judgment. You pray at night, when the world finally goes quiet. No performance, no audience, just you and the infinite. And still, nothing happens. Not because you lack faith, but because something inside you is split. One part of you reaches upward with hope, while another tightens its grip around an old sentence learned long ago. Love must be earned, mercy must be paid for. This is the hidden fracture, the subconscious gate that never sleeps. It remembers every shame you buried, every moment you decided you weren't enough yet. So even as your lips ask for grace, your inner law quietly refuses it. Not out of defiance, but out of loyalty to a belief you never chose. And the most unsettling question isn't why prayer feels heavy. It's what part of you needs that weight to stay. There is a room inside you that never sees daylight. It isn't loud, it doesn't argue, it doesn't protest, it simply decides. You enter prayer believing you are alone with God, with the infinite, with the unseen mercy you were told would meet you halfway. But behind the words, behind the posture, behind the whispered sincerity, something else is seated, silent, robed in memory, holding a gavel carved from old moments you thought you had outgrown. This is the divided court. In the front of the room stands your conscious faith. It speaks in rehearsed language. It quotes scripture. It affirms. It declares. It says all the right things with trembling hope. It raises its hands and says, "I believe." But in the shadows, behind the bench, another voice clears its throat. It does not speak in words. It speaks in verdicts. This voice doesn't ask whether your prayer is sincere. It asks whether you deserve an answer. And without announcing itself, without cruelty or malice, it reviews the evidence. That night you failed and never forgave yourself. That promise you broke and quietly renamed human. That moment you learned love was conditional, approval temporary, safety something you earn by being better tomorrow. You don't remember choosing this court, but it remembers choosing you. This is the contradiction no one teaches you to name. You call it humility. You say, "I'm just being realistic." You say, "I don't want to be arrogant." You say, "Maybe I need to grow more before I receive." But listen closely. Humility does not reject good. Devotion does not delay mercy. Faith does not require self-punishment as proof. Yet guilt wears these disguises perfectly. It bows its head. It lowers its eyes. It pretends to be reverence. And so you kneel, split in half. One side asking, one side resisting. One side calling God near. One side holding the door shut from the inside. This is not sabotage as rebellion. This is sabotage as loyalty. Because somewhere early, shockingly early, you learned a rule that felt safer than hope. If I stay unworthy, I won't be disappointed. If I delay my arrival, I won't have to face the terror of being seen and still rejected. So the subconscious steps in as protector. It cancels the prayer, not because it doubts God, but because it doubts you could survive the answer. And here is the collapse most people never see coming. The more sincerely you pray, the more violently the contradiction activates. Because the subconscious doesn't understand words, it understands identity. And every time you ask for something you do not secretly believe you are allowed to have, the inner court tightens its grip. Not angrily, not cruelly, faithfully, loyal to an old vow whispered in a moment of desperation, "I will never expect too much again." That vow is still active. It sits between your request and its fulfillment like a silent judge who never raises his voice, because he never has to. And you feel it as heaviness, as delay, as silence that feels personal. You leave prayer confused. You wonder what you did wrong. You promise to try harder tomorrow. But tomorrow never enters the court. Only the past speaks there. And the past is very convincing. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't scream. It tightens. It watches. It waits for you to hope, and then quietly reminds you why you shouldn't. You feel it most clearly after prayer, not during it. During prayer, there is warmth, intention, a fragile brightness. For a moment, you almost forget the weight you carry. You almost believe this time might be different. But afterward, when you rise from your knees, when the room returns, when the night exhales, that's when the shadow speaks. Not in sentences, in sensations. A dull certainty settles in your chest. Nothing will change. A familiar resignation folds itself around your expectations. You brace not for disappointment, but for confirmation. And this is where the hidden problem sharpens its edge. You think self-doubt makes you honest. You think guilt makes you pure. You think holding back expectation keeps you safe from arrogance. But what if this posture isn't holiness at all? What if it's grief pretending to be wisdom? What if the part of you that refuses to receive is not disciplined but wounded? No one tells you this because it destabilizes everything you were taught to admire about yourself. That quiet seriousness, that emotional restraint, that refusal to ask for too much. It looks like maturity, it feels like control, but beneath it lives a subtle desperation. If I don't hope fully, I won't break again. So you negotiate with the infinite. You ask, but not too boldly. You believe, but not completely. You open your hands, but keep your fingers tense, and then you call the outcome God's will. This is the most devastating disguise of all, because it allows the divided mind to survive unquestioned. One voice prays for light. Another insists darkness is safer. One voice says, I am ready. Another whispers, not yet, not you. And the tragedy is not that the prayer fails. It's that the refusal feels familiar enough to feel true. Your subconscious does not argue with faith, it outvotes it. It doesn't say you can't have this, it says people like you don't. And because it learned that rule during moments of shock, moments of humiliation, loss, abandonment, regret, it carries emotional authority your conscious mind cannot override with words. So you stand there, divided, wondering why devotion feels exhausting, why prayer feels heavy instead of expansive, why silence feels loaded instead of peaceful. You think the problem is effort. You think you need to believe harder, longer, purer. But the truth tightening around you now is far more unsettling. Your faith may be sincere, but your identity is still arguing against it. And until that argument is seen, until the hidden vow is brought into awareness, every prayer must pass through a court that was never designed to grant mercy, only to protect you from hope, only to keep the old story intact, only to make sure nothing surprises you again. And as you sit with this realization, something inside you begins to stir. Not relief, not clarity, but a quiet, destabilizing recognition. If this court exists, if this gate has been deciding all along, then the silence you blamed on heaven may have been coming from somewhere much closer. And that thought, that unbearable, unbelievable thought, does not bring comfort. It brings a deeper question, one you can't unhear now. There is a law moving through you that does not respond to sincerity. It does not respond to effort. It does not respond to tears. It does not respond to how badly you want things to change. That realization alone feels like betrayal, because you were taught, explicitly or silently, that if you meant it enough, if you humbled yourself enough, if you waited patiently enough, the universe would eventually reward your devotion. But this law has been operating long before devotion learned how to speak. It listens to something older, deeper, quieter, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Prayer is not a plea shouted into emptiness. It is a signal, and every signal passes through a filter. You believed the filter was moral. You believed it was spiritual. You believed it was external. But the filter has always been internal, not judging what you ask for, but whether what you ask for matches what you secretly agree is possible for you. This is the invisible law of inner agreement, and it is ruthless in its neutrality. It does not punish. It does not reward, it reflects. You send a signal upward with your words, but the subconscious, your inner gatekeeper, checks for coherence before it allows the signal to pass. Not coherence of logic, coherence of identity. If your request says, I am ready for love, but your inner meaning says, love leaves, the gate closes. If your prayer says, I accept abundance, But your inner law says, people like me must struggle. The gate remains sealed, not because the universe denies you, but because the subconscious enforces loyalty to what you have already defined as true. This is where awe and dread collide, because the gatekeeper is not your enemy. It is your most faithful servant. It has spent your entire life maintaining internal consistency, protecting you from contradictions that once hurt too much to survive. Every time reality surprised you with pain, the gatekeeper took notes. Every time hope collapsed into regret, it adjusted the rules. Every time you said, "I'll never let myself expect that again," it carved the sentence into law. And now, years later, you kneel at night, whispering prayers that contradict an entire internal constitution. The gatekeeper does not argue. It simply enforces precedent. This is why repetition doesn't work. This is why affirmations feel hollow. This is why begging exhausts you. Because the subconscious does not respond to repetition. It responds to meaning. And meaning is shaped by emotional memory, not conscious desire. So when prayer feels like it disappears into silence, what you are feeling is not absence. It is filtration. The signal reaches the gate and stops. And the most shocking part, the part that fractures everything you thought you understood, is that the gate is not blocking what you want. It is blocking what would violate the identity you are still loyal to. You think you are loyal to faith, but there is a deeper loyalty beneath it. A loyalty to past definitions of safety. A loyalty to suffering that once made sense. A loyalty to a self-image shaped in moments of shadow. The subconscious does not ask, "Is this good?" It asks, "Is this familiar?" And familiarity wins almost every time. So prayer becomes a mirror, not reflecting heaven, but reflecting the unspoken agreements you carry into the night. And as this mechanism reveals itself, a cold awareness spreads through you. If this law is real, if inner agreement governs the gate, then the problem was never lack of faith. It was coherence, and coherence does not negotiate. It only aligns or rejects. You feel it now, don't you? That unsettling mixture of clarity and grief. Because this law doesn't comfort you, it exposes you, and it leaves you standing at the edge of a terrifying recognition. If the gate obeys agreement, and agreement is shaped by identity, then changing outcomes means confronting something far more dangerous than unanswered prayers. It means confronting who you have been loyal to being. Here is where the ground truly begins to shift beneath you. Because once you understand that prayer is a signal and the subconscious is the gate, something deeply uncomfortable surfaces. You have been faithful to meanings you never consciously chose. The subconscious does not live in the present moment. It does not track growth. It does not celebrate insight. It enforces continuity. Its highest value is not joy, not truth, not expansion. Its highest value is consistency. This is the betrayal no one prepares you for. You assumed the subconscious existed to serve your highest good, to support your evolution, to reward your effort. But its loyalty is not to your future. It is to your past interpretations. Whatever you decided something meant during moments of emotional intensity, those meanings became law. When you were ignored and decided, "I am forgettable." When you were betrayed and decided, "Trust is dangerous." When you prayed once long ago and nothing happened and decided, "I must not be ready." Those decisions were not thoughts, they were verdicts. And verdicts do not expire on their own. This is why desire alone is powerless. You can want healing with every conscious fiber of your being and still radiate resistance without knowing why. Because the subconscious is not moved by longing, it is moved by agreement. And agreement is formed in silence, in shock, in despair, in moments when the heart says, "This is how the world works." Once a meaning is installed, the gatekeeper defends it relentlessly, not out of cruelty but out of obedience. It does not ask whether the meaning still serves you. It asks only whether you have revoked it. And most people never do. They grow older, they become spiritual, they learn new language, but inside the same ancient contracts remain unsigned, unexamined, untouched. So prayer becomes tragic, because it is sincere, and sincerity is not enough. You send a frequency upward, but the filter inside you is tuned to an older station, a station that plays loss on repeat, that normalizes waiting, that confuses longing with virtue, and the universe, life, God, the infinite, does not override this filter. Because overriding it would shatter your sense of self, and the subconscious will protect identity even at the cost of joy. Read that again, slowly. The subconscious will protect identity even at the cost of joy, even at the cost of peace, even at the cost of answered prayer. This is why miracles feel rare, not because the universe withholds them, but because they require an internal permission most people never realize they must grant. And now, as this realization settles, something unsettling happens. The problem becomes intimate, personal. There is no enemy to blame, no external wall to break through, no divine silence to resent, only a mirror. And in that mirror, you glimpse the shadow side of devotion, the part of you that clings to struggle because struggle feels honest, the part of you that distrusts ease because ease feels undeserved, the part of you that equates suffering with sincerity. This is not sin, it is conditioning. But conditioning has consequences, and the consequence is a divided signal, a prayer that reaches upward while an identity pulls backward, a frequency that asks for expansion while meaning insists on limitation. And now you are standing at a threshold, not a solution, not a technique, a threshold of awareness. Because once you see the law of inner agreement, you cannot go back to blaming effort, timing, or worthiness. The question changes, it sharpens, it becomes almost unbearable in its honesty. What am I still loyal to believing about myself? That my prayers are quietly obeying? That question does not resolve itself. It does not soothe you, it hangs in the air, heavy, electric, alive, and it waits. If something inside you just tightened, if your chest feels heavier but clearer, if this didn't feel like information but like recognition, do not move past this moment in silence. Silence is how the old agreements survive. This realization did not arrive randomly. You didn't stumble into it. Something in you is already listening at a deeper frequency now, alert, awake, unsettled, and that state is fragile. It closes easily. It slips back into habit if you don't mark it. So mark it, not mechanically, not casually. Ritual matters to the subconscious. When you like this video, you are not pressing a button, you are signaling alignment. When you comment, you are not typing words, you are giving form to an internal truth. When you subscribe, you are not following a channel, you are choosing to stay in this frequency. This is not about algorithms, this is about coherence. The divided self stays divided because it never declares where it stands. So declare it. Type something, anything in the comments, even a single word. I see it. I feel this. This is me. Let the subconscious witness you agreeing with awareness instead of hiding from it, because agreement is the language the gatekeeper understands. And if you simply listen, nod internally, and move on, the old silence will reclaim its authority. This moment will close, the threshold will pass. So don't let it pass quietly. Anchor yourself here. Stay. Because what comes next is not comfort. It is a shift that only works if you are present for it. Tonight, not tomorrow, not after you've improved, not when you finally feel ready. Tonight, something subtle becomes possible. Not a technique, not a method, not a list of steps you can fail at. A shift. Because the problem was never that you didn't know what to say in prayer. It was that too many voices were speaking at once. The courtroom never adjourned. So before sleep, when the mind softens, when defenses loosen, when the subconscious leans closer to the surface, there is a different way to enter the night. Not as a petitioner, not as a defendant, but as the room itself. You don't argue with the judge, you don't plead your case, you don't review the evidence. You let the courtroom dissolve. No witnesses, no charges, no verdicts waiting in shadow, just presence. This is where desperation tries to interrupt. It will say, but what about my request? It will say, what about what I need? It will say, if I don't ask, nothing will happen. That voice is familiar. It learned to survive by gripping, But tonight, you do something almost shocking in its simplicity. You stop separating the one who asks from the one who receives. You do not send a signal upward. You become the place where the signal and the answer meet. No striving, no earning, no reaching. Just a quiet internal posture that says, without words, there is no court here anymore. This is not resignation. It is not passivity. It is a reorientation so subtle the mind almost misses it. The moment you stop presenting yourself for approval, the gatekeeper has nothing to enforce. Because there is no contradiction to police, you are not saying, give this to me. You are not saying, I hope this happens. You are resting in a single internal agreement. There is nothing standing between me and presence does not negotiate. This is where the subconscious begins to loosen, not because you commanded it, but because it no longer detects conflict. No request opposing identity, no desire threatening safety, just coherence. And coherence is disarming. The gate does not open with force. It relaxes when it realizes it is no longer needed. But don't rush this. The old identity will try to reassert itself. It will remind you of timelines, of evidence, of past disappointments. Let those thoughts pass without engagement, not rejection, not suppression. Witness them and remain. Because something fragile is happening here. For the first time, the part of you that always asked permission is no longer speaking. And the part that always denied it has gone quiet, not resolved, not healed, just silent. And in that silence, a new tension emerges. Not fear, not relief, but a strange, unfamiliar openness that feels almost dangerous. Because without the courtroom, you don't know who you are yet. And the night, the deep, watchful night, is listening. There is a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when the old structure panics. It doesn't shout, it tightens, because it senses something slipping out of its control. You are lying there, suspended between waking and sleep, and the mind reaches instinctively for its familiar tools. Memory, comparison, doubt. It wants to restore the courtroom. It wants to assign roles again. Who am I if I am not asking? What protects me if I am not withholding hope? How do I stay safe if I stop monitoring the outcome? These questions feel practical, responsible, necessary, but they are echoes of a system that only knows how to exist through tension. So you don't answer them. You don't correct them. You don't replace them with affirmations or spiritual language. You let them dissolve unanswered. This is the most difficult part, not because it requires effort, but because it requires restraint. The restraint to not intervene, the restraint to not manage the moment, the restraint to let the subconscious experience something it has not experienced before, a state without a verdict, without waiting, without self-surveillance, just being. And this is where suppressed hope quietly surfaces, not as excitement, not as expectation, but as a low, steady warmth beneath the chest. It does not say, something will happen. It says, nothing is blocking this. That distinction matters. Hope tied to outcome still activates the gatekeeper. Hope grounded in coherence does not. So you remain there, not reaching for sleep, not resisting it, allowing the body to drift while awareness stays gentle and open. No courtroom, no petition, no identity performance, just a unified field. And suddenly, something becomes clear in a way that feels both shocking and unbearably subtle. The subconscious was never waiting for better words. It was waiting for absence of contradiction. It was waiting for the moment when the one who wants and the one who decides stop being separate. This is not a breakthrough you can claim. The moment you try to own it, it collapses. It is an atmosphere you pass through. And as sleep finally begins to pull you under, a strange tension remains. Not discomfort, but anticipation without object. You don't know what will change. You don't know how. You only know that the internal structure that once resisted has gone unusually quiet. And that quiet is not empty. It is watchful, alive, as if something ancient has noticed your stillness and is waiting to respond in its own time. Something subtle has already changed, not in your circumstances, not in the outer world, but in where you are standing inside yourself. You are no longer kneeling, not in defiance, not in pride, but because there is no longer a place to kneel from. The identity that once approached life as a petitioner, careful, apologetic, quietly bracing for refusal, has begun to lose its authority. Not because you overthrew it, but because it no longer makes sense in the new internal geometry. You can feel the rupture if you pay attention. Moments arise where the old reflex reaches forward automatically, to justify, to explain, to lower expectation before it can be disappointed. And then, nothing happens, no follow-through. The reflex fires but finds no role to play, because the one who used to need permission is no longer at the center. This is disorienting. The mind wants a label, a story, a spiritual identity to replace the old one, but none fit. You are not more faithful. You are not more enlightened. You are not finally worthy. Those are still courtroom words. What is emerging does not argue for itself. It does not request recognition. It simply assumes alignment. And this assumption feels dangerous at first, because if you are no longer positioning yourself as someone who must earn, prove, or wait, then what protects you from disappointment? The old identity answers immediately. Nothing. And that is exactly why it fears this shift. Because the new orientation does not armor itself against loss. It does not manage outcomes to stay safe. It does not preemptively suffer to soften future blows. It stands exposed, not recklessly, but undivided. This is the identity rupture most people never cross. They want results without releasing the self who survived without them. They want answered prayer without letting go of the identity that learned to live with silence. But silence shaped you. Waiting shaped you. And now something inside you is quietly stepping out of that shape. You begin to notice it in small, almost unsettling ways. You pause before speaking. Not because you're unsure, but because you're no longer rehearsing. You desire something. And don't immediately follow it with an internal apology. You sense possibility. And don't rush to balance it with realism. This is not confidence. Confidence still performs. This is something colder and warmer at the same time. A kind of internal authority that doesn't announce itself. You are no longer asking life what is allowed. You are listening to what aligns, and alignment does not negotiate. It does not beg. It does not convince. It chooses. That realization hits with a strange mix of liberation and grief. Because if you are the gatekeeper now, if the division has collapsed into a single field of awareness, then the delays, the heaviness, the unanswered prayers of the past were not punishments. They were reflections of who was in charge, and that truth stings, not because it blames you, but because it reveals how long you lived beneath your own authority without knowing it. You feel the fire now, not explosive, not triumphant, but steady, quiet, contained. The fire of someone who no longer needs permission to stand where they are. And yet, this new identity does not feel complete. Not yet. It feels unfinished, as if something is still watching, waiting to see whether this coherence will hold when the night deepens. There is a quiet test that comes after any internal shift. It does not announce itself. It arrives disguised as normalcy. Life resumes its familiar rhythms, the same people, the same responsibilities, the same unresolved edges. And somewhere in the middle of it, something does not happen. You do not collapse back into the old posture. The old reflex waits for its cue, to worry, to manage, to preempt disappointment. But the cue never comes. Not because you are trying to be different, but because the center has moved. You begin to realize this identity is not something you do. It is something you no longer interrupt. The petitioner identity was loud because it was insecure. The gatekeeper identity was rigid because it was afraid. This one is neither. It does not rush to interpret events. It does not demand reassurance from outcomes. It does not scan reality for proof of worth. It assumes coherence as a baseline. And that assumption changes everything in ways that feel almost unbelievable. You still feel emotion. You still feel desire. You still feel uncertainty. But none of them fracture you internally anymore. They pass through a single field instead of splitting into roles. There is no inner argument about whether you are allowed to want what you want. Wanting is no longer evidence against you. This is the moment where power quietly replaces effort. Not power over others, not power over outcomes, power over division. And division was the only thing ever draining you. You begin to notice how much energy you use to spend negotiating with yourself, justifying hope, restraining joy, delaying permission. That energy is now unassigned, floating, available. And availability is dangerous, because it means when something moves toward you, love, opportunity, clarity, change, there is no internal wall to catch it and say, not yet. The identity you are becoming does not block. It does not chase either. It stands, and standing in a world built on striving and fear feels radical. But there is still tension here, because this identity does not promise safety, it does not guarantee outcomes, it does not wrap itself in spiritual certainty. It simply refuses to fracture itself to survive, and the final unsettling realization begins to surface. If you are no longer divided, then whatever responds to you now will be responding to something whole. And that is not something you can predict. Wholeness is not controllable. It invites responses that do not follow old timelines. It opens doors you didn't plan for. It destabilizes identities that depended on waiting. So the new self does not celebrate. It listens, it watches. It waits, not from lack but from readiness. Because something has changed in the field around you. Not visibly, not yet, but in the way silence feels charged instead of empty. As if the night itself recognizes you differently now. Night returns to its rightful place, not as an ending, but as a threshold. The room is the same, the darkness familiar, the quiet uninterrupted. And yet, something is different. The silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like attention. You notice it in the way your breath moves without supervision, in the way your thoughts rise and fall without demanding belief, in the way your body rests without bracing for disappointment. There is no prayer forming now, no request gathering momentum. And for the first time, that does not feel like failure. It feels intentional, as if the space where words used to strain has been cleared for something more precise, something that does not need language. The old question, why hasn't anything happened, tries to return, but it dissolves before it can land, because something has happened, just not where you were trained to look. The gate is no longer resisting, not flung open, not dramatically transformed, simply just not pushing back. And that absence of resistance changes the atmosphere in ways that cannot be measured. You don't feel victorious, you don't feel resolved, you feel suspended, held between what was and what has not yet revealed itself. And that is the most unsettling place to be, because it is no longer defined by regret, no longer driven by desperation, no longer shaped by silent vows made in moments of pain, but it is also not yet defined by outcome. There is no proof, no sign, no confirmation you can point to and say, this is it. Only a subtle awareness that the inner conflict that once spoke over everything has gone quiet. And in that quiet, the question that hovers is not, will I receive? It is, what responds when nothing inside me resists anymore? That question does not seek an answer tonight. It doesn't need to. It hangs in the air like a charged current, invisible, undeniable, alive. The night deepens, sleep approaches, and somewhere beyond effort, beyond worthiness, beyond asking, something listens, not to your words, but to your coherence.